To more than 1 billion people, yet only about 15% of its trade happens within the continent. Shipping goods from the OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg, South Africa, to destinations like Accra-Ghana can still be harder than shipping them from China. As African leaders push to boost intra-regional trade through the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, major gaps in infrastructure, customs systems and transport remain. In this report, I examine why Africa still struggles to trade with itself and what it will take to change that. Behind me is the OR Tambo International Airport, Africa's third busiest cargo hub. Every year, more than 300,000 tons pass through the hangars that are in buildings just behind me. That's like 50,000 elephants, enough to fill the city of Cannes, where they hold the world-famous film festival in France. But if I wanted to send a package from here to Ghana, where I'm from, it would be much trickier than it seems. You see, it's easier to send a package from Beijing to Johannesburg than it is to send one within the continent, even if it's less than half the distance in some cases. And why? It's simple but complex. You see, if you're shipping from a place like China, you're dealing with one set of rules, and that's the same in the European Union, or from the US to Europe. Borders are coordinated, paperwork is digital, and trucks and planes move across multiple countries without necessarily having repeated checks. Inside Africa, it's different. Each border has its own customs, fees, and forms, and many of these rules reflect colonial trade. Now, these colonial trade corridors were built to link mines to ports and not African cities to each other. Take Johannesburg, for example. It grew as a hub for gold and mineral exports, so railways and highways were built to move resources south to ports and not to other places like Accra, Lusaka, or Nairobi. And that's not all. The UN reports that trucks are the most dominant mode of transport across Africa, but they are much slower and more expensive than other regions because of costs like fuel and bad roads. And that's why the African Continental Free Trade Area was started. The Secretariat is trying to fix this with digital customs, united tariffs, and corridors designed for African to African trade. But they have a lot of work to do. Africa needs 2 million more trucks, 100,000 rail wagons, and 250 cargo aircraft by 2030, just to meet demand. So whether you're sending flowers from Nairobi or setting up a business in Lusaka, the question remains, can Africa build the roads, rails, and digital systems to make trade easier, or will logistics keep the continent stuck in traffic? Now, earlier, I asked the president of the Ghana Venture Capital Association, Amma Gyampo, for her assessment of the implementation of the AfCFTA so far.
It's great to see the AfCFTA implementation, get a lot of publicity. We go to a lot of conferences to talk about AfCFTA, but I think in reality, we're looking at beyond the ink drying on paper for the agreements and the ratifications. We need to really look at how we are dealing with some of the practical barriers that still stand in the way of, one Africa, a single market. So I think the engines aren't quite flaring up on the ground in terms of implementation. And so we need to really understand what's working so far. I think high level, we've got a lot of commitments, but we need to really drill down to some of the details.
So what would you say the biggest bottleneck is? We've been talking about infrastructure, customs, logistics.
Obviously, we need to look at, the bureaucracy of it. It's a huge undertaking, and nobody can underestimate how massive it will be to harmonize 54 countries. The bureaucracy of it is a huge, obviously, the elephant in the room for us. And so it's really looking at some of the things beyond the hardcore infrastructure, right? We can build the roads, we can build the railways, but we need the digital payments to work. We need the rules to be harmonized. There's no point in us having trucks in the queue somewhere if they're stuck at a border somewhere they can't cross. And that's the reality of what's still happening. People are getting stopped multiple times. Taxes are leaking through borders. It's the softer things as well that have not been really dealt with in terms of how people behave, custom officers, how they behave, how they are trained, and just the general culture of really trading as one block. I think that's what we need to really look at.
Now, you've been vocal about autonomy in Africa when it comes to fundraising. How does financing fit into this picture? And why hasn't more African capital flowed into areas like this?
In terms of venture capital, private equity and financing our small businesses, I think there's a massive conversation going on around how we mobilize our local capital beyond the traditional sort of DFI, the development finance institutions, the donor relationships, the aid relationship. I think, we all know big aid is now over. And so the focus is very much on how we, unlock some of the trapped capital within our borders through our pension funds, our insurance companies and our local banks to really fuel the enterprises that will be driving the logistics, the payment solutions, to enable the payments, to enable the infrastructure, to enable the logistics. We need a really solid ecosystem of investment vehicles, investment structures, more flexible fund structures, and also even the legal and policy frameworks around enabling those locally. So all of those things are elements that we tend to work on, in terms of our day-to-day interactions with government, with our, our regulators, for example, in the private capital industry. And so we continue to do that. But I think, again, we need to work more closely together as an African continent to enable some of these solutions to work. And especially around, ECOWAS and the various regional blocks. Of course, Africa is 54 countries, so we recognize that the strength of our regional blocks will really be more critical to enable payments and investments to flow to our enterprises.
Amma Gyampo joining us there from Accra. Still to come on the bulletin, meet the young filmmakers from Kano in northern Nigeria who are on a quest to take their style of cinema known as Kannywood global.